So, I decided, because it dropped today on the PS5 and was supposed to drop on the PC but has been bumped up to the 1st of December, despite the fact that a couple of hours ago, if you pressed the Steam store page, you would have just seen that it was coming soon today. Um, Walking Dead Destinies came out today, and I was the only person stupid and crazy enough to buy the game and play it. Um, One thing that's kind of funny and interesting that I've only just kind of realized looking at the Steam store page to back myself up is that it shows in the trailer a lot of cutscenes that don't quite make it into the full game. I've kind of just realized, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So The Walking Dead Destinies is a kind of cool idea, I'm not gonna lie, where the first 4 seasons of the show are remade for the purpose of basically a new medium, which is the medium of video games. Not only is there an interactive element, but also the story element is more interactive, and you can choose certain events and how they play out, which characters live and die, for instance, who takes the lead in certain situations, and so on and so forth. I kind of like this as a core idea, and I do appreciate it. The problem is that this was made quite clearly on the budget of a ham sandwich that's been sat on and forgotten about and is currently inedible. And as a result, the game looks like a PS3 game and plays a bit clunkily and has no cutscenes. And honestly has flaws up the wazoo. It depends on how charitable you want to be. I can see some people saying this is on par with Gollum or Kong, but I'm not one of those people. My main reason for this is that I feel like effort was put into this, like they tried on some level. Whereas with Kong and Gollum, I feel like it was just a game they wanted to die. They wanted to get it out there so it would just die instantly. I feel like this is a game somebody wanted to make. I feel like it's a game that they tried to make as good as possible, but they just didn't have the means to do it. And it also doesn't help that they insisted on making everything 3D and look as quote-unquote good as possible, because that means that you have to pay more money for cutscenes and other things. So here we are. So the game itself kind of lacks a lot of the cutscenes. It was shown in trailers that there was going to be cutscenes, but a lot of these cutscenes I've just noticed do not appear in the game. And that is a bit of a problem because a lot of the choices are based around narrative. So without the cutscenes, you haven't got much to establish why you should give a shit about anything you've done. So as far as this game's storytelling goes, which I think is important in a game which is based around a story which you can then manipulate, the story is barely existent. There's no cutscenes. Characters just say and do things, and then it cuts to the next bit. And the best you can get is either a very brief exchange with still image cutscenes or a text scroll. What I find kind of comical about the text scrolls and the other cutscenes is that they assume that you know the plot. If you don't know the plot, you're going to be lost as fuck. And what happens is at one point, the game has you just randomly teleport to a farm, which you've never seen before in the game, because, hey, they end up in a farm in Season 2. And all these characters are just appeared that don't have any character because they've not been introduced. Now, in the show, there was a reason why they end up on the farm and why they talk to these people. But in the game, you just are there. So seeing the show before playing this game is essential, because if you don't, you will not know what the shit is going on. This game has absolutely no intentions of filling in people who weren't paying attention. And at the same time, it itself didn't pay attention to a few minor details from the story. So certain decisions don't have the impact that was suggested they'd have if they happen. For example, at the beginning of the game, you have the option between siding with Merle and T-Dog when they have their little interaction and scuffle in the first episode, second episode. And basically, what I find funny about that, well, two things. One, for some reason, they censor Merle's racial slur, which featured in the show, but they cut it from the movie and from the cutscene and just have T-Dog punch him in the face before he can even say it. But then T-Dog drops an F-bomb and says fuck, which wasn't in the show. So uh, I don't quite... Why censor things and then that were in the show and then have things that were not in the show? It's just kind of silly to me. I get that the argument that, you know, racial slurs are more offensive could be made, but this character is established as being a racist, so it kind of makes sense for him to say shitty racist things, as he does in the show, but for some reason in the game he can't even be racist. But anyway, on top of that, because I just did everything the opposite of how it went in the show, I ended up siding with the racist, and as a result, this ends up with Merle being part of your group and not T-Dog. T-Dog is basically handcuffed and left behind on top of the roof, like Merle was in the show, and Merle joins your camp instead. Now, they kind of overlook the fact that Merle mentions the fact that he was planning to rob the camp, and that's not happened, nor has it even been suggested that it was going to happen. So, see, I know more than these guys. But I do find it kind of funny that as far as actual impact on anything goes, there's not really an impact. Daryl is still the same character, even with Merle there. The whole of season 2 just plays out like it would anyway. So you kind of very quickly realize that the changes in the way this shit plays out isn't quite as groundbreaking as the game needs to be for any of it to matter. A game doesn't have to look like Mass Effect to have impact with your choices. Personally, I think making the game 3D and making it so that you have to have all these 3D consequences is probably what drags the game down just a little bit. But hey. So, one thing I've noticed is that the game is like £40. My friend was asking how the shit is the game so cheap and so small an installation file. Well, the first thing that they've done is they only have 13 characters in the game, as far as I can tell. There's 13 characters from the show. Now, obviously in a video game, especially a budget-limited video game, you are going to have to trim the fat in some places. Certain characters like Jim, for instance, and Morales are cut from the game because, well, they only are in it for one episode. Why would they waste the resources to make them? But they cut Andrea from the show in this game. So Andrea isn't in the game for some reason. And several other characters are not in the game. And I find that a bit odd, to be honest. They have a model for Morgan, who's in it for like 20 seconds, but they don't have a model for Andrea, who's in it for like 3 seasons. It's a bit of an odd decision, not gonna lie, especially her importance in the book, but whatevs. So I noticed very quickly that no matter what choices you take, the game goes along the same paths of seasons 1, 2, and 3, and 4. There's not really... It's not like you go to a different place instead of the farm if you do a certain thing in season 1, or you avoid the prison if Shane takes over in season 2, or something like that. It will always play out the same way. A lot like the Telltale game, except it feels even less impactful than the Telltale game. I don't even feel like I have the illusion of choice in this game, which I think is a bit of a problem given that its whole thing is based around your destiny and what you can change and what can happen and what... It doesn't quite work that well. I got about a chapter into season 2 before I reached the game's current ending, but I'll get into that in a bit. The actual game itself is a bit like State of Decay Light. It's State of Decay, but more linear, which is fine. But the gameplay is very basic. It's about on par with Walking Dead Season 4, and yet somehow it doesn't look anywhere near as good or play anywhere near as smoothly, which is kind of embarrassing because Walking Dead Season 4, the game by Telltale, actually wasn't designed to be that fluent or smooth or anything. It could have gotten away with less and was basically just a way of making it more interactive. In this, it's the core gameplay and it feels all clunky and kind of awkward at times. The combat is really easy. I haven't managed to die once. Admittedly, I did put it on a low difficulty because I was expecting the game to be hard because I was expecting it to bug out. I'll give the game that. I haven't noticed the game bug out much or anything like that. There's not really any glitches or anything that came to mind. I didn't notice anything that made the game like fuck up or skitter me about all over the place like some other games might. I've played some glitchy AAA games in my time, and this isn't one of them. In fact, this is tragically one of the most stable games I've played in a while. Nothing of note happened except for one big thing at the end of my experience, which again I'm holding off. But it is a doozy. So yeah, the actual gameplay of it is kind of it's competently put together. It works. There's a stealth section. There's segments where you have to fight zombies where the zombies weren't in the show because, well, they needed to add bits to the game where you actually encounter zombies. So it does create a situation where Rick just suddenly appears out of his bed, no cutscene or anything, in episode 1, and he's like running around the hospital trying to sneak past zombies, and he just doesn't seem to react to the fact that there are zombies now. He just wakes up, Doofus Rick here, he just wakes up and he's just like, oh yeah, there's zombies now, better, keep to the shadows. And I'm like, dude, like, really, this is your reaction to this shit? Just dead people walking around and you just think, yeah, this is normal, I'm just gonna leave now, bye. I get that obviously there's a limitation as to how cinematic you can make a game that clearly has no budget, but at the same time I feel like anything would have been better than what we get, which is nothing. It's nothing. He gets out of bed and just walks down the stairs as if nothing happened and leaves. Not really remotely impeded by the gunshot wound, not remotely impeded by the fact that he's in a world full of undead flesh-eating abominations. It's just all, it's fine. He just water off a duck's back for Doofus Rick. I call him Doofus Rick because he looks more like the loser cousin of Aaron from like season 5 onwards, and his voice sounds nothing like Andrew Lincoln's. It's kind of funny because some of the characters vaguely sound like the characters from the show, others sound like a really poor impression, and others, I don't even think anyone even showed them who they were meant to be voicing. And Rick is definitely one of the characters who falls short in every way when it comes to his voice and his behavior and just the way he appears, everything about him. I like as well in the first level, there's a bit where you're told to go and find your clothes, and you find your clothes just neatly folded on the bonnet of a car. Like his entire iconic sheriff outfit was just left neatly folded by the zombies, I suppose, for him to just find and pocket and put on. And that's that. It's not his outfit. It's just some clothes he found and stole from that were just left there. Other characters have like a side character thing going on where they have their own little side missions that pop up in the middle of the game and you have to give them advice or dispatch resources for them. And it depends on, well, basically whether or not you stick to the show with those, because if you don't, it goes to shit. And if you do, it's insultingly easy. There are a few characters like Merle who obviously aren't in the show at this point in the game, so you actually have to think outside the box with that one. But I honestly didn't care what happened to Merle, so I just told him to just do whatever, and it turned out to work, so that's good. Anyway, enough stalling. Let's talk about um the bit that I stopped playing at because it's funny. Basically, I got to the bit where Carl gets shot in season 2. I'd say spoilers, but in all honesty, yeah, this game is just one massive spoiler. If you're gonna play this game, you need to watch the show beforehand because Jesus Christ, they are not gonna give you any hints as to what the fuck's going on. So Carl gets shot. Unlike the trailer, there isn't even a cutscene. You end up on the farm. You stand around and talk for a bit, and then you get a little like text scroll that just says, "Oh, by the way, Carl was shot. We're going to get meds to save his life." And that's the bit I was on. So unlike the show where Shane and Otis go to the school to get the medical supplies for Carl, in the game it's Shane and either Maggie or Beth. Now, you might be wondering, does the big thing happen with Shane and Otis between Maggie and Shane? I don't know. I couldn't tell you because I couldn't get to the end of it. Because what happened was, I was asked to do a series of tasks with Maggie, then I did them with Shane, then I did the task with Maggie, and then I did the task with Shane. This leads to a boss fight in a gymnasium. It's kind of like the bloater fight from The Last of Us, except shit. So I killed it by stun locking it and repeatedly hitting it to death, and then realized that the game was not giving me any further instructions. The game cuts out like it's doing something and then reopens again. I pushed no buttons, and I'm just stood in a gymnasium wandering around, just pushing every conceivable button. I think I tried this for the best part of like 45 minutes. I replayed the entire mission in case the trigger was long ago and I accidentally fucked it up a while ago, and from what I can tell, it's the same deal. The game's fucked. This game ends it in the gymnasium. It just ends. There's nothing further you can do. Shane just decides he's going to make a life for himself in there, and that's that. That's the end of the game. You can walk around your new world and interact with a stretcher, but you can't climb on it. You push it around. You can just stand there. You can swing a sledgehammer around, but there's nothing else you can do in the game. That's it. You're done. And that is the end of the game. I looked it up. Apparently, lots of people... There's an entire Reddit thread of people who've had this problem, where the game just fucking ends at this point in the game. Not the best for a game that's charging you more than 10 quid, and it's made by a real studio who made a Cobra Kai game, apparently, a few years back. This isn't a indie game. This is a double A game, I'd say, or maybe a single A game. I don't know, but it is a middle shelf game, which isn't an excuse for the game breaking about a third through the second act. That's pretty dire. Bearing in mind that Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks was a middle shelf game, and that you can play from beginning to end. Midway never had a game like this. I don't know why companies are doing it now. This really is just a Q&A testing failure, and I don't blame the actual QA testing department. I blame the idiots that will not fund them properly and treat them like shit and overwork them. I guarantee that will be the problem, because it's always the problem with these things. So yeah, my overall thing. This game is actually hilarious to me. It has a face I don't even think a mother could love, but at the same time, I can't really get mad at it. Partly because I know they're probably going to come up with a day one patch to fix this problem, so I'll be able to talk about it a bit more after. But I don't feel like it fucks up on any level, apart from the obvious. But I don't feel like it fucks up on any level so badly that I hate it. This isn't, as I said, a Gollum scenario. It doesn't run poorly, it runs okay, it plays mediocre gameplay just fine. And overall, I feel like someone tried on some level, so I can't be too mad. But at the same time, I wouldn't recommend this to anyone who's not me. Even people who really like the show, I'd recommend something like State of Decay over this. State of Decay 2 is, I mean, it's basically the same thing, but better, basically. It's the same thing, but better. In this game, they also cop out and have special zombies, like it's Left 4 Dead or something, except they don't even go all the way with that. They just have one that screams, which is basically the cut screamer from Left 4 Dead, and a slightly stronger one, which I thought was the well zombie, but apparently it's not. It's just a zombie that's slightly chunky, and that's all they give us. And honestly, the special zombies are kind of shit. I think if you're going to do that, you might as well go big or go home. And honestly, they probably should have just gone home. And yeah, so overall, I would not recommend this to anyone, especially not at full price. I find it an interesting talking point. I found it an interesting experience, but I think that this game is dire. It's amusing in how inept it is at times, and it looks kind of crap for a PS5 game, but I do kind of appreciate that the visuals are somewhat consistent. Like, I know it all looks a bit crap, but it's not like one thing looks like a PS5 game and other things look like a PS1 game. It all consistently looks like a PS3 game, which I think is probably better than some games where you got things in the background that look like complete shit. I know people have seen that before, where you have really high-tech shit in the foreground and then you just walk into a room and everything looks like dog shit. State of Decay or the Telltale games, depending on what aspects of this game appeals to you more, whether you want the gameplay with light decision making, I'd go for State of Decay. If you want like strong story with less gameplay, then the Telltale Walking Dead games are much better. There's another game as well I'd recommend called Dead State. That game is buggier and more broken than this, but it is a CRPG set in what is basically a Walking Dead knockoff universe, and it does a really good job. I made a review on that game a while back if anyone wants to go watch that. That is actually much better than this, and it was made by like a much smaller team. It is broken, and you can't get past a certain point in the game because of a glitch that basically destroys like your playthrough if you're not careful. But I still recommend it over this. It's funny, it's broken, it's Walking Dead Destinies.
Professor Curious is okay.